Open Air Healthcare, second edition, God's magnificent outdoor automatic healthcare system. This is the third in the series. Hello, I am John EverBlest. This is one of my favorite presentations. The conclusions are so unexpected, yet such obvious truth. Healthcare is not what we've been led to believe. True healthcare is outdoors, and God's fingerprints are all over it. The experiences of the pioneers of open-air healthcare cannot help but change us in the way we look at health and healing. This is just delightful presentations. New revelations just keep popping up, things that you wouldn't have known to ask about. What the pioneers learned back then sets us free now, today. Eden. When God placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, he surrounded them with nature, side to side, top to bottom. All of nature was designed to keep them healthy, automatically, without them even trying. And different parts of nature had different jobs in keeping Adam and Eve healthy. It wasn't just the herbs that were for the service of man. Everything was for the service of man. From the very ground they walked on to that bright star 92 million miles away was healing by design. All they had to do was show up. Just standing there on planet Earth, their health was improving because God embedded our health care into nature. Therefore, when we separate ourselves from nature, we separate ourselves from our health care. Eden was God's natural law demonstrated as an example for all of us. And that natural law was the greatest healthcare system the world has ever known. It was simple, easy, powerful, automatic, and free. It still is. We were fearfully and wonderfully made. Therefore, God gave us a healthcare system that was also fearfully and wonderfully made. It was God's magnificent outdoor automatic healthcare system. That outdoor healthcare system contains the provisions for the terrible emergencies of disease, even the diseases of this wicked age, especially. No drugs required, no drugs allowed. The healing agencies embedded in nature are both prevention and cure. They are the very counteragents to the weapons currently formed against us in the ongoing satanic, genocidal poisoning of mankind. God clearly saw what was coming and made provisions for it. God has had this whole thing figured out from the beginning. His solutions are so simple, which is proof. The very simplicity of it is proof that they were fearfully and wonderfully made. Fresh air is so simple that it must be very powerful to heal. And it is. We're going to prove it. The historical micro-stories of outdoor living that I'm just about to tell you lengthen the chain of evidence that our all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful God has made abundant healing provisions for exactly such a time as this. All right, micro-story number 1. This one's fun. Outdoor living versus artificial living. This is from the Health Question Box 1920 by Dr. Kellogg. Question, does civilization make men? The answer, Benjamin Franklin once told the following story, said Kellogg. Here's the quote. After the principal business was settled, the commissioners from Virginia acquainted the Indians by a speech that there was, at Williamsburg, a college with a fund for educating Indian youth, and that if the 6 nations would send down half a dozen of their young lads to that college, the government would take care that they should be well provided for and instructed in all the learning of the white people. This ought to be interesting. We are convinced, the Indian replied, that you mean to do us good by your proposal, and we thank you heartily. But you, who are wise, must know that different nations have different conceptions of things, and you will therefore not take it amiss if our ideas of this kind of education happen not to be the same with yours. We have had some experience of it. Several of our young people were formerly brought up at the College of the Northern Provinces. They were instructed in all your sciences. But when they came back to us, they were bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to bear cold or hunger, knew neither how to build a cabin, take a deer, nor kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly, were therefore neither fit for hunters, warriors, nor counselors. They were totally good for nothing. We are, however, not the less obliged by your kind offer, though we decline accepting it. And, to show our grateful sense of it, if the gentlemen of Virginia will send us a dozen of their sons, we will take great care of their education, instruct them in all we know, and make men of them. Wow. The Indians were far more healthy because they lived close to the earth. They learned relevant, practical lifestyle skills from the beginning. Down-to-earth living, literally. Another Indian story here. The following story is excerpted from an article entitled Housebound by Mrs. E. Kellogg, page 237 of Good Health magazine, May 1905. Here's the story. In the effort made some years ago to civilize the American Indians, a certain government agent in the Northwest built some comfortable, up-to-date dwellings upon the farms in his jurisdiction, which he succeeded in persuading the Indians to occupy. Not long thereafter, circumstances necessitated his leaving his station for a time, but he left congratulating himself upon the progress his wards had made toward civilization. So, imagine his surprise upon returning to his charge 2 years later to find the Indians reinstated in their wigwams, while the houses he had taken so much pains to provide for them were devoted to the storage of their farming implements. Upon inquiry as to the occasion for such change, he was informed that all who slept in the houses became sick, and some of them spit blood. That's tuberculosis. When they returned to their well-aerated wigwams, they regained their health, and naturally, they preferred health to houses. Again, the health question box, 1920, Dr. Kellogg, page 114. Here's the question: is the simple life more or less an experiment? The answer? No. No. The principles of this simple life are well grounded in human experience. Hundreds of examples might be cited of men who have prolonged their lives in useful activity far beyond the usual age at which men become senile and incapable by temperate and simple living. A striking example of the influence of a return to the primitive mode of life is afforded by the example of Alexander Selkirk, the original of William Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Here's the story. Selkirk, a sailor, was put ashore on the uninhabited island of Juan Fernandez by his captain, with whom he had quarreled, and for 4 years lived in solitude, subsisting upon the natural resources of the island, whose whole stock of food when put ashore having consisted of food sufficient for 2 meals. At first, he was much depressed by the lack of human companionship, but after a year or two, he came really to enjoy his simple life. The genial climate, the simple out-of-door activities necessary to supply his daily needs, and especially an extraordinary sense of well-being and the joy of living, made him quite content with his lot, so that when he was finally accidentally discovered by a ship compelled to land for supplies, he was really more concerned with the effort to assist in relieving the sailors' needs than elated at the prospect of leaving his island home. During the 4 years of natural, simple living, his vigor, agility, and endurance had increased to such a degree that he could outrun and capture the swiftest wild goats speeding up the steep mountainsides. Wow. Says his biographer, who interviewed him in 1711, soon after his return to England, respecting the effects of the simple life he was compelled to lead, here's the quote, "This manner of life became so exquisitely pleasant that he never had a moment heavy upon his hands. His nights were untroubled and his days joyous from the practice of temperance and exercise." The man frequently bewailed his return to the world, which could not, he said, with all its enjoyments, restore to him the tranquility of his solitude. This plain man's story is a memorable example that he is happiest who confines his wants to natural necessities, and he that goes further in his desires increases his wants in proportion to his acquisitions. Or to use his own expression, "I am now worth 800 pounds, but shall never be so happy as when I was not worth a farthing." Okay. Did you notice that the magnificent endurance from outdoor living? Did you notice the magnificent endurance from outdoor living? That's going to be the theme here. Pharmaceuticals can never impart endurance or happiness to us. Now, the next true story is rather extreme, but extremely interesting and telling. All right, here we go. Number 4. The tubercular patients in the Alps, as you see here in this photo, has the best opportunities of exposing his skin to sun and air baths. And he or she must learn to do this and give up overclothing and overheating in the sun boxes and stuffy warm rooms indoors at night, our houses, which are permitted at many foreign sanatoria. He can gain a lesson from the following letter sent to me from Australia, a lesson taught by the success of the exposure treatment applied to children. That's the image. Here's the letter from that man who worked on a banana farm in Australia. "I had read your article on Dr. Rollier's sun cure and had experienced the delight of surf bathing, the pleasure of which, I have observed, lies quite as much in the exposure of the skin to the sun and wind as to the water. About 2 months and a half ago, it occurred to me that I was in a capital position to get all the pleasure and benefit that might be obtained by sunbathing. I work by myself on a banana plantation on the side of a mountain. So I started, first working naked to the waist. Then about a week later, I discarded pants and boots and worked absolutely naked for about a week. Then, being afraid that someone might come on me unawares, and also there being times when I might possibly be seen from an adjacent house, I took an old pair of trousers, cut the legs off at the fork, and have worked in them ever since. I find it very pleasant and enjoyable, and I am sorry to have to put clothes on when I leave work. The most enjoyable part of it to me is not the sun, but the feeling of the air in motion on my skin." Pause. Here's an aside here. Adam and Eve felt that same sensation on their bare bodies as well. The moving breezes impacting their body. All right, back to this. "Though exceptionally strong and healthy, I have all my life been an exceedingly chilly mortal that dreaded the cold. It was indeed mainly owing to that fact that I left England in search of a warmer climate. And for the last few years, this inability to stand the cold has been increasing. Now, it is 9 p.m., and a fortnight from Midwinter Day, I am sitting here perfectly naked, writing this in a cold, drafty house on a bare wooden chair, and the very same spot where this time last year I could not sit without a cushion on the chair, an extra thick pair of woolen trousers, a thick flannel shirt, a woolen sweater, and a heavy overcoat, and then I'd still have to go to bed for warmth a good deal earlier than this. I have often had to put on my overcoat in the house at night in the middle of summer. I now go driving with thin trousers and a thin cotton singlet, unbuttoned, my chest all bare, and nothing else. I work naked some days in a bitter cold wind, driving light showers onto me. At times, I take off my abbreviated pants and sit or lie down on the cold, wet ground and enjoy the nice, cool feel of it on my bare skin. Wow. Winter has no more terrors for me. I expect in another year to qualify for a trip to the South Pole, and all this is the result of 2.5 months nakedness. All right, let's comment on that. God has provided a simple way for us to acclimate to weather. When this man returned to God's original Edenic lifestyle, his body recalibrated itself. Take note that it required no pharmaceuticals. Story number 5. When children after the holidays return to school, epidemics of cold usually begin to run through the community. In the holidays, they may paddle all day in the sea, bare-legged, exposed to far greater cooling than at school. They may shiver and be blue with cold after bathing, but they do not suffer from colds. The colds begin when the weather confines them in shut-up and artificially warmed schoolrooms and places of assembly. All right, here's my comments on that. Even the medical term, a cold, is misleading because colds are not caused by being cold. Although the medical establishment would have us believe that colds are caused by cold. Before this presentation is finished, I believe that you will come to the same conclusion that I have, that God, from the very beginning, gave us the cure for the common cold. And its prevention, and it's ridiculously simple. And that's just cold. Open-air living prevents and cures many other health conditions and optimizes our health. Continuing on. In 1814, in an epidemic of typhus fever at Paris, some cases were placed in a building in one of the highest and breeziest parts of the city. These cases did infinitely better than those in regular hospitals. Number 7, at Gettysburg Camp Letterman Hospital. This is 1883. Typhoid fever cases treated in tents in the field recovered in larger percentage than those treated in the finely arranged city hospitals. Number 8, from 1900 to 1905, the overall mortality of a consumptive patient in open-air wards was less than half that of those who received the orthodox indoor treatment of the day. Has it occurred to you, too, that this is the very thing we should have been doing during COVID? Most everything that was forced upon us during COVID was against God's natural law and his natural health care. Everything. This is 1918 Camp Brooks, emergency open-air hospital in Boston. Influenza treated with sunlight and fresh air. Here's the story. The Surgeon General of the Massachusetts State Guard, William A. Brooks, held that patients did not do as well in an ordinary hospital, no matter how well ventilated, as they did outdoors. Patients in indoor sun parlors were not exposed to direct sunlight all day as they were when outdoors. He reported that in one general hospital with 76 cases, 20 patients died within 3 days, and 17 nurses fell ill. By contrast, this ought to be interesting, according to one estimate, the regimen adopted at the outdoor camp reduced the fatality of hospital cases from 40% fatality to 13% fatality. Brooks wrote that the efficacy of open-air treatment has been absolutely proven, and one has only to try it to discover its value. Now, the next story is from a prominent health reformer of the mid-19th century. She is addressing a woman who sealed herself up indoors and the terrible results that followed. And it applies to all of us now. Apparently, there are specific, predictable diseases which come from a sealed-up lifestyle. Here's the counsel, and this counsel is the most telling of all these micro stories, things that we never knew we needed to know. Sister C has a diseased imagination. She has secluded herself from air until she cannot endure it without inconvenience. The heat of her room is very injurious to her health. Her circulation is depressed. She has lived in the hot air so much that she cannot endure the exposure of a ride out of doors without realizing a change. Her poor health is owing somewhat to the exclusion of air, and she has become so tender that she cannot have air without making her sick. If she continues to indulge this diseased imagination, she will be able to bear scarcely a breath of air. She ought to have the windows lowered in her room all through the day that there may be a circulation of air. God is not pleased with her for thus murdering herself. It is unnecessary. She has become thus sensitive through indulging a diseased mind. Air she needs, air she must have. She is destroying not only her own vitality, but that of her husband and daughter, and of all who visit her. The air in her room is decidedly impure and dead. None can have health who accustom themselves to such an atmosphere. She has petted herself in this matter until she cannot visit the houses of her brethren without taking cold. For her own sake, and for the sake of those around her, she must change this. She should accustom herself to the air, increasing it a little every day until she can breathe the pure, vitalizing air without injury. The surface of the skin is nearly dead because it has no air to breathe. Its million little mouths are closed because they are clogged by the impurities of the system and for want of air. It would be presumption to let in a free draft of air at once from out of doors, all through the day. Let it in by degrees, change gradually. In a week, she can have the windows down 2 or 3 inches day and night. Lungs and liver are diseased because she deprives herself of vital air. Air is the free blessing of heaven, calculated to electrify the whole system. Without it, the system will be filled with disease and become dormant, languid, and feeble. Yet you have all been for years living with a very limited amount of air. In thus doing, your wife drags others into the same poisonous atmosphere with herself. None of you can possess clear, unclouded brains while breathing a poisonous atmosphere. Now let's just take an aside here for a moment. How can air be dead if it's still breathable air? How can air electrify the whole system? What if this reformer's use of the word electrify wasn't just a metaphor? What if she meant it? All right, let's try to explain this. Have you ever been up in the mountains, at the beach, or in a thunderstorm and suddenly felt a huge boost in your mood? It may very well be a high concentration of negative ions, a negative charge, just as the Earth has on its surface. Negative ions exist in nature in lots of places, including ultraviolet rays from the sun, discharges of electricity in the air after a thunderclap or lightning strike, wherever water collides with itself, like a waterfall or the ocean shore, produced as part of the normal growth process for many plants. This negative charge has been shown to be beneficial to health in numerous ways, such as preventing asthma or depression, etc. Air has both positive and negative charges in it. There is a balance between them. But if it's mostly or all positive, we get bad effects on our health. The negative charge in the air is lost within a very short time, especially as it enters the house, which may be why it was said that air in our homes must be refreshed with a constant circulation of fresh air, or the air will become dead, and it will no longer electrify the whole system. All right, back to Sister C. Sister C dreads to stir out to go anywhere because she must feel the change in the atmosphere and take cold. She can yet be brought into a much better condition of health if she rightly treats herself. Twice a week, she should take a gentle bath, as cool as will be agreeable. A little cooler every time until the skin is toned up. I didn't know that was a thing. Air, the precious boon of heaven, which all may have, will bless you with its invigorating influence if you will not refuse it entrance. Welcome it, cultivate a love for it, and it will prove a precious soother of the nerves. Air must be in constant circulation to be kept pure. The influence of pure, fresh air is to cause the blood to circulate healthfully through the system. It refreshes the body and tends to render it strong and healthy, while at the same time its influence is decidedly felt upon the mind. Isn't that interesting? Imparting a degree of composure and serenity. Go figure. It excites the appetite. Really? And renders the digestion of food more perfect. How many of us knew this? And it induces sound and sweet sleep. We got to keep those windows open. The effects produced by living in close, ill-ventilated rooms are these. The system becomes weak and unhealthy. The circulation is depressed. The blood moves sluggishly through the system because it is not purified and vitalized by the pure, invigorating air of heaven. The mind becomes depressed and gloomy. Pay attention to that. While the whole system is enervated, that's the opposite of energized, and fevers and other acute diseases are liable to be generated. Your careful exclusion of external air and fear of free ventilation leave you to breathe the corrupt, unwholesome air which is exhaled from the lungs of those staying in these rooms, and which is poisonous, unfit for the sport of life. All right, by the way, did you know that both wintertime seasonal affective disorder, or SADS, and sealing one's self up indoors in the winter both cause depression, gloom, and fatigue? Isn't that interesting? Would it be reasonable to ask the question, could SADS be cured by opening a window to let fresh air in? Fresh, cold, electrified air in. What if SADS isn't really so much a light deficiency as it is a fresh air deficiency. All right, continuing on, let's read that sentence again. Your careful exclusion of external air and fear of free ventilation leave you to breathe the corrupt, unwholesome air which is exhaled from the lungs of those staying in these rooms, and which is poisonous, unfit for the sport of life. The body becomes relaxed. The skin becomes sallow. Digestion is retarded, and the system is peculiarly sensitive to the influence of cold. Even a slight exposure produces serious diseases. All right, let's review the stated results of sealing ourselves up indoors in the winter. And then I'm going to make an unexpected application. Let's just read the red portions because I have a point to make with them. Here it is. Starting at 6, surface of skin is nearly dead because it has no air to breathe. Number 7, pores clogged by impurities. Number 8, lungs and livers are diseased. Number 10, the whole system will be filled with disease. Number 11, creates poisonous atmosphere. So here's a practical application. Polymorphous light eruption. In the wintertime, we can be eating a very healthy vegan diet, drinking lots of water, etc. But if we seal ourselves up tight indoors, we can expect to be toxic and diseased by springtime. With our lungs and livers diseased, our pores clogged with impurities, is it any wonder why so many develop skin rashes and so-called sun sensitivities when they finally step back into the spring sunlight and fresh air? Some of the toxins could be reacting negatively to sunlight, causing rashes. And or sunlight is beginning to open those pores and draw out those impurities out to the surface of the skin, where they irritate the skin, causing rashes. The merchants of pharmakeia call those rashes polymorphous light eruption. According to the National Institute of Health, polymorphous light eruption is a fairly common skin rash triggered by exposure to sunlight or ultraviolet light, or artificial ultraviolet light. Well, what a coincidence. Sealing oneself up indoors in the winter is also a fairly common thing. The merchants of pharmakeia tell us that the cause of polymorphous light eruption is, well, that's just unknown. We just don't know. But sunlight has something to do with it. Yet, can we not reason from cause to effect here? Could sealing oneself up indoors be the actual cause of polymorphous light eruption? Diseases are just symptoms of living out of harmony with Eden's health principles. 1 + 1 = 2. The natural order of things was that we were designed to live, work, and sleep in the open air. It was our constant health care. Now here's a tiny little related story from Dr. Kellogg. He says, the importance of keeping the skin pores unclogged is impressively illustrated by a tragic incident which occurred in Italy in the 15th century. In preparing picturesque decorations for a feast given by the Duke of Milan, the famous artist Leonardo da Vinci covered a young boy with gold leaf to represent the Golden Age. The boy became very ill, and every effort was made to remove the gilding, but without success. And in a few days, though warmly wrapped, he died in the artist's arms, shivering with cold. In the building of houses, it is especially important to secure thorough ventilation and plenty of sunlight. Let there be a current of air and an abundance of light in every room in the house. Sleeping rooms should be so arranged as to have a free circulation of air day and night. No room is fit to be occupied as a sleeping room unless it can be thrown open daily to the air and sunshine. In most countries, bedrooms need to be supplied with conveniences for heating that they may be thoroughly warmed and dried in cold or wet weather. Yes, our homes need to be built in harmony with Eden principles. Number 12. Now, here's something unexpected, but I think we'll be glad we know it. The world-renowned Battle Creek Sanitarium started using man-made sunlight with great success. And if it was used at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, the world wanted it. So, natural healthcare providers all over the world started buying artificial sunbathing equipment as well. But many of these practitioners found that the equipment did not live up to the promised results, and they made their displeasure known. Dr. Kellogg was asked why this equipment wasn't working like it was promised. Dr. Kellogg's answer was simple. Open your windows. Let the cool, fresh breezes blow upon the patient's skin. And it worked, just like God intended it to work in nature. Cool, electrified, fresh breezes impacting our skin, especially full body, are actually healing. It's a natural remedy. Not just air, but fresh, moving, invigorating, electrified air. It works in partnership with sunlight. Sunlight needs fresh air to work properly. The inverse is also true. A great deal of the tanning is due to the influence of the open air and winds. For example, a passenger on a steamship will tan more quickly and more deeply by standing upon the forecastle of the ship, that's the front of the ship, an hour or two daily, than by sitting amidship in a deck chair. Number 14, Mammoth Cave Air Cure Experiment. This is Dr. Kellogg speaking. The out-of-door treatment is now recognized as the most effective method thus far discovered for dealing with pulmonary tuberculosis, and exposure to the sunlight is conceded to be one of the prime factors in the out-of-door method. Purity of air is not sufficient, and here's the explanation of that. Many years ago, a number of consumptives tried living in the Mammoth Cave, the air of which is pure, cool, and of uniform temperature. They were brought out after a few weeks either dead or corpse-like skeletons. Fresh air needs sunlight to function properly. Sunlight needs fresh air to function properly. 15. Trench warfare soldiers healthy even when chilled. Here's the story. When I was in Paris before the war, wrote a French soldier, I never passed a winter without coughs and colds and rheumatics. Here in the trenches, however, I never have a thing wrong with me. Not a thing. And we're all like that. At the medical inspection the other day, out of 400 men, there was only one man who had anything the matter with him, and he had his finger cut. We were on an exposed slope, bare and cheerless, with mud in generous quantities, and a chill, penetrating wind accentuating the discomfort. But no one except myself seemed to mind it. Fresh, cold air, sunlight during the day, no artificial lights at night, grounding. That's what these soldiers experienced. God's health care is outdoors, automatic, and magnificent. All right, number 16. In 1914 to 15, Canadian troops were camped in tents on Salisbury Plain under extreme conditions of wet and discomfort, but with excellent health. As soon as they were moved into huts, however, catarrhs and sore throats spread rapidly, and several cases of cerebrospinal fever occurred. Number 17. Nurses who shut themselves up for the evening are more affected by colds than their patients who live in open-air shelters at sanatoria. Number 18. Insanity improved by open-air living. Go figure. All right. Since 1901, that was 5 years for them, consumptive, insane patients have been separated and treated to their own great advantage and incidentally to that of their non-TB fellow inmates in canvas tents throughout the 4 seasons of the year at the Manhattan State Hospital, East New York City. An experimental camp was established consisting of 2 large dormitory tents, 20 by 40 feet, each containing 20 beds, with smaller tents of different shapes for the accommodation of the nurses, the care of hospital stores, pantries, and a dining tent for such patients as were able to leave their beds and tents for their meals. It was originally intended to continue the camp only through the summer, but when in the autumn it was found that the favorable experience continued, it was decided to carry the experiment on a modified scale. Into the approaching winter, the camp at first had been placed upon an elevated knoll properly exposed to the full force of the summer breezes. For the winter, its site was removed to the center of the island, where hills and buildings acted as a windbreak. The number of patients was reduced to 20, those most ill being retained and the others being returned, much against their will, to the buildings. In the accessory tents above mentioned, large stoves were built with wire screens surrounding them to protect the patients, and with asbestos and other fireproof material for the prevention of fire. Slatted wooden movable pathways were prepared, which might furnish means of passage between tents when the storms should come. It was found that despite high wind and bad weather, a more even temperature had been maintained and less discomfort had been experienced in the tents than in the hospital wards most exposed to the force of the gale. This tent camp, in which all TB patients with active manifestations are isolated, has remained in continual use through the succeeding winters and intervening seasons. Among the results obtained are the reduction to a minimum of the danger of infection to other patients and to employees. The patients themselves have suffered no injury or hardship, but have, on the contrary, been unmistakably benefited. There has been a decrease in the death rate, both absolute and relative. Common colds were here unknown during the winters. Dr. McDonald makes the observation that where TB and insanity coexist, they are apt to alternate as to the prominence of several manifestations, the mental symptoms being more pronounced while the physical are in abeyance, and vice versa. Under the tent treatment, he has found a general disposition toward accord in the manifest improvement in both respects, proceeding concurrently, and some of the discharges from the hospital, which gave most satisfaction at the time and most assurance for the patient's future, were of the inmates of the tuberculosis camp. Number 19, the cold air cure. This is about Dr. Kellogg. Cold air is a friend, not an enemy. A powerful healing agent, not a cause of disease. It is the avoidance of cold air that causes disease, not its presence. And that was Dr. Kellogg. Cold, fresh air has special value, says Dr. Kellogg, in good health, because it stimulates the organs and all the functions of the body. It quickens the heart to the greatest activity and increases the number of red corpuscles in the blood. Cold air also contains more oxygen to the cubic inch than does warm air. In 6 breaths of cold air, 30 degrees, one gets as much oxygen as he would in 7 breaths of warm air, 100 degrees. Hence, the body takes in 1/7 more oxygen in cold weather than in warm weather. This increased amount of oxygen is a matter of great consequence. This is why one feels better in cold than in warm air. A brisk walk on a cold, crisp winter morning creates a splendid appetite for breakfast, for the same reason that the fire burns brighter on a cold winter night. When the fire burns with a particularly bright glow, people are wont to say, "Winter is coming. See how bright the fire burns?" The fire burns brighter and faster because it has 1/7 more oxygen available. Number 20, the Kimball House first open-air school in Battle Creek. Dr. Kellogg and another doctor in Battle Creek wanted to make sick children well and well children stronger to prevent TB and other infectious diseases. So they started an open-air school in 1914, and it did indeed make sick children well and well children stronger. Here's the story. Originally, 125 children from around the city were identified as potentially benefiting from the open-air school. Mainly, children recuperating from illness or those from poor families. These were invited, but on the first day of school, not one child showed up. So, the children of Dr. Kimball were drafted to attend the school. These sisters were the first 2 students. Eventually, all 5 Kimball children attended an open-air school. The daily routine of a hot, healthy lunch, rest periods, fresh, invigorating cold air, and lots of individual attention was proved very beneficial, and the town took notice. Soon, other students joined them. Now, according to the Battle Creek Inquirer, February 20, 1916, the tide of sentiment turned so suddenly and completely in its favor that those at the head of the schoolwork are overwhelmed with demands and entreaties of parents who want their children given such health-giving opportunities. The title of that article was "Open Air School Becomes Very Popular Here, and Provision Must Be Made to Extend the System." All right. Now, the windows were kept open, even in the coldest weather. A stove near the teacher's platform and radiators around the room kept the room temperature near 60 degrees. The ideal is cold, fresh air for the lungs, warmth for the rest of the body. Students dressed in special hooded uniforms made from Hudson Bay wool blankets. They wore gloves and felt boots which reached up to their knees. Their bulky uniform was worn over their regular school clothes. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg donated the milk from the sanitarium farms and a sun lamp for the students who took light treatments for 20 minutes each day. The school nurse made regular visits, and when the children were sufficiently improved, they returned to regular classrooms. Number 21, this is from the Detroit Free Press, Sunday, July 22, 1906, entitled "Remarkable Case of Cure of Consumption by Outdoor Life." Battle Creek doctor, given up as beyond saving 5 years ago, is now strong as an ox. Never feels effects of heat or cold. Here's the story. One of the most marvelous cases on record of complete cure of pulmonary consumption is simply by outdoor life and fresh air, is that of Dr. Herbert Osig of this city. 5 years ago, it was announced to him that he had tuberculosis and was beyond recovery. He decided, however, that he would not die. Since that time, he has lived in a tent, summer and winter, and is now cured by the strenuous treatment which he has subjected himself to. He has a tent 12 by 14 feet in the grove at the home of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. Dr. Kellogg owned the entire block, and it was a big block. That tent has a framework of wood covered with wire netting with a screen door for an entrance. There is a canvas top and a fly. There are canvas sides and ends to the tent which roll up, but are never lowered except during a rain or snowstorm, and then only upon the side which the storm is approaching. There is a wooden floor. In this tent, the doctor sleeps all winter with the sides open and with no stove or fire. Often in the morning, his bed is covered with the snow sifted through the screen. By the way, do you see that open-air tree house above this tent in the background? That was where Dr. Kellogg slept. His kids also slept outside, but they slept in tents. That's Dr. Osig's 3.5 years after graduated exercise. He's in the Sanitarium Outdoor Gymnasium. That's from July 1905. All right, continuing the article. In the summertime, when he, Osig, comes to his tent in the evening, he puts on a light, open-breasted shirt and a thin pair of white trousers. He goes bareheaded and barefooted constantly, except when in the city on business. He never wears underclothing. At night, he goes to bed stark naked. About 10 o'clock, he pulls a blanket over him, and sometimes about 1 o'clock, he covers himself with a second blanket. He never feels in the least the effects of heat or cold. In the morning, he takes a 10-mile run and then a bath. Twice a day, he again takes runs of 2 miles each day. Frequently, he walks to Kalamazoo and back, a distance of 50 miles. His health is now perfect, his muscles like iron, and he is an athlete. He is visited by hundreds of patients from the sanitarium. The professors at Yale College have extended to him an invitation to visit that institution in September, and he has accepted. Okay, I have some things to say about that. What if hundreds of people visited us for curing all manner of disease, even cancer, by the application of open-air living, living in harmony with nature? If we want to be noticed, we must do something notable. If we want to vindicate God's healing agencies, let's vindicate them big. If nature does the healing, God gets the credit. Someone is going to do this, and soon. We need to be the first, the head, and not the tail. If someone else does this, they will do it in the name of science and will glorify themselves. If we do it, we will do it in the name of God and glorify God. And we're told, him that honors me, I will honor. I see these sorts of open-air nature cure encampments as a soon-to-be necessity. All right, back to the story. Dr. Osig never uses meat or vegetables, salt, pepper, or other condiments, but lives entirely upon fruits and nuts. There are several other persons living in tents near the doctor, among them being George H. Allen, the champion pedestrian of Great Britain, who recently arrived in this country. Pedestrian means he's a speed walker. Allen is shown with Osig in the picture herewith. Osig holding a fawn, there being 19 deer and fawns in the park in which the doctor is tented. I'm sorry, that's the best picture we had on that. It's the only one we had. So, did you notice that the open-air cure didn't just cure Dr. Osig of TB, it made him a strong, robust athlete, acclimated to all weather conditions, resistant to disease and cold within a year or two. He was far healthier after the outdoor cure than before he ever got sick. Remember, doctors pronounced him beyond saving. Note that the world was clamoring for his story. It's what happens when we live those advanced principles of health reform. In other words, living in the open air and close to the earth, Eden's outdoor automatic lifestyle. All infectious patients, this is about Dr. Kellogg, all infectious patients at the Battle Creek Sanitarium were assigned to live in open-air tent colonies outside, even in the winter. They were not allowed to stay inside the sanitarium building. Here's what Dr. Kellogg said about those patients in open-air tents in the wintertime, and it's very surprising. He says, sanitarium patients, although struggling with such formidable maladies as lung and bone tuberculosis, thrive best, make the surest and most rapid progress toward recovery in the winter months. Oh, my. How is that kind of rapid healing possible without sunlight? Kellogg alleges that cold, fresh air was more effective than even the sunlight was on his patients. Unbelievable. All my life, I have been perplexed as to why God shuts off nature's healing agencies in the wintertime. Why would he do that? Now, finally, here's another answer to that. God does not shut off nature's healing agencies in the winter. He just activates different healing agencies in the wintertime. One of them being cold, fresh air. So, it may not actually be a lack of sunlight that's making people sick in the wintertime, but rather a chronic lack of fresh, electrified, invigorating air, especially cold air. God told us, after Adam and Eve fell, that he would curse the earth for man's sake. For man's sake. The curse that God placed upon the earth caused the freezing winters. But the very cold itself was for our sake, for our healing. And that means that there is no cold and flu season. It's the seal ourselves up indoors season, which means we need to allow our sleeping quarters to be filled with cold, fresh air every night, as our body is kept warm under the blankets. Better still to sleep outside in a well-ventilated tent. That's what I do. By the way, those people who lived in tents at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, the ones who healed so rapidly, didn't just have cold air. They also lived without artificial electric lighting, EMFs, or electricity, and they were grounded to the earth. And sunlight in the day was the norm. Topics that are also addressed in this series: grounding, electricity, etc. Now, back to cold air. 22. Cold air is the healing agent in the wintertime. This is that same health reformer. She says, I wish now to say that all patients should keep out of doors as much as possible. She's addressing patients, your patients. And many will be benefited by sleeping in the open air. My lady workers have slept out on the veranda all winter and have been free from coughs and colds. It's such a simple thing. It costs nothing. It boosts our immune systems and restores health. And now the next slides will be referring to TB patients in the Swiss Alps and the magnificent health produced by practicing an open-air life. Number 23. This is from Dr. Augusta Rollier. The air and sunbath is the most powerful of all tonics and health restorers. It rebuilds the organism and it increases its vitality. Children strengthened during the summer months by air and sun baths are hardier and can much better withstand all the illnesses that may affect them during the winter. The same applies to adults. So, we must resist the temptation to dismiss the power of an air bath all by itself. Benjamin Franklin took a naked air bath every morning. It's not just about sunlight. God intended that moving air impacting the body be a healing remedy, a natural remedy that we've never used on our patients. All right, it's very simple. Let's move it on. In fact, the general health of Dr. Rollier's patients proved quite remarkable. Visitors often commented on the lack of coughs and colds among children who were so exposed. The patients at Layson continued to improve in the outdoors, even in the wintertime. Even though vitamin D production was essentially absent. We have been told all our lives that cold air is to be avoided because it causes colds and flus and pneumonia and death. We are told that sunlight is to be feared for it causes cancer and death. We are told that we must have drugs to manage our ever-increasing chronic ills from a lifestyle out of harmony with Eden health principles. We are made to believe that there is no better way and that there never was a better way. Folks, it's time we stop depending upon a thus saith mortal man and start depending on a clear thus saith the Lord. All right, last micro story wraps it up really well. Regarding the newcomers at an English alpine sanatorium, it is noticeable how quickly they respond to the climatic conditions. And in 2 or 3 weeks, that's it, look and feel in better health. The writer, discussing the climate with 4 men, all cases of arrested disease, TB, able to engage in vigorous outdoor sports and looking strong and healthy, found that they agreed that they had never known what it was to be really well and feel the full joy of living till they were impelled by tuberculosis to practice the outdoor life. God's open-air healthcare was always supposed to be our primary healthcare, not our man-made treatments. Primary, secondary. These men proved that it was the primary. They used it as primary. It was known sunlight, fresh air was the primary treatment for all these different diseases. History clearly proves that God, from the beginning, gave us the cure for the common cold and many other diseases. And it's ridiculously simple, wasn't it? Fresh, electrified air. Well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it works for you. Apply it to your patients if you're a lifestyle provider, a healthcare provider. That's the whole point. God is good.